I will speak plainly because ambiguity becomes poison when poured into the wells of state. You know why I summoned you to this room and why no clerk records these words. Between our two nations, the river has carried grief for a generation. Borders hardened into trenches, flags into shrouds, and each year we buried the young we had taught to salute. I could not let another season of funerals roll over us. So in the chapel of a border monastery where the river bends left, witnessed by 3 who will keep their silence until death, I exchanged vows with the counterpart I once called adversary. It was not romance that took my hand, though respect has grown where enmity once lived. It was statecraft, old as dynasties and yet subversive in an age that worships transparency. The marriage is the keystone of a treaty whose visible stones will appear ironclad, but whose quiet arch will bear the weight. I am not asking you to applaud. I am asking you to understand that peace built only on paper tears as easily as paper. Peace built on human stakes resists the politics of the next morning. Now I will set out the architecture of the agreement you will bring to life. In public, the accord is called the River Compact. It opens with mutual recognition and ends with mutual renunciation of territorial claims. Between those poles lie the planks we need. We establish a joint economic zone along both banks, 20 kilometers deep, that suppresses tariff walls and harmonizes customs schedules for goods produced within the zone. A supervisory commission will license enterprises that meet environmental and labor standards and will publish trade and employment data on a monthly cadence. We publish this because legitimacy will depend on whether payrolls rise, not on whether speeches sing. The border itself will remain, but rather than a wound it becomes a seam. We agree on demilitarization of the zone, verification by ground teams, drones and satellite feeds shared into a secure joint operations room run by officers who have trained together in a neutral country. We create a standing arbitration panel of 5, selected from 3 allies acceptable to both sides, and any violation triggers automatic review with time-boxed corrective action. We add snapback clauses for tariffs and patrols that can be activated if violations exceed tolerances, and we will publicize these thresholds so communities understand what behavior risks their livelihoods. The heart of sovereignty remains untouched, yet the arteries that supply our economies begin to run alongside each other rather than through barbed wire. The legitimacy of this treaty must be born twice, once in law and once in the eyes of our own people. The law is the easier birth. We will submit the compact to our parliament for ratification under the constitutional provision that governs international agreements with security implications. We will not seek a referendum because a referendum today becomes a plebiscite on fear rather than policy, and because the river has been seeded with too much grief to be plowed by a single question. Instead, we will convene a citizens' assembly drawn by lot, 200 from across our provinces, with translators, independent moderators and access to all the maps and numbers. We will give them 90 days and a mandate to publish a report in accessible language. Their conclusions will be advisory, but the ethical force of ordinary judgment will stiffen the spine of our legislators. The second birth, the one in the minds of our people, will require proof more than persuasion. That is why the first deliveries from the economic zone, the first microloans to market women, and the first scholarships for apprentices to cross the seam will be rushed in the early weeks. A family that eats because of the compact will defend it more fiercely than any minister. Secrecy will haunt us until we decide to reveal the union at the heart of the plan, and we will not decide that in the abstract. The accord contains a private annex lodged with 2 guarantors, both small neutral states that trade with us and our counterpart and can bear the moral obligation of safekeeping. The annex records the marriage as a personal covenant to pursue peaceful dispute resolution and to use influence over our respective councils to prevent escalation. It specifies recusal protocols for procurement decisions, investment licenses, and appointments to key security posts where conflict of interest might arise. If revelation becomes necessary because of a leak or an effort by hardliners to poison public trust, we will point to the annex and the recusal regime as evidence of foresight, not of compromise. I do not intend to make this secret permanent, but I will not allow it to be weaponized while institutions are still infant. We will decide disclosure when the river zone is employing 50,000 and our inflation rate is half the current level. The first 100 days will be a cascade. On day 1, we issue a joint ceasefire order down to platoon level with rules of engagement that make violations punishable by court-martial on both sides. Drones will patrol in pairs, one from each flag, so that imagery is shared without delay. By day 7, we will stand up the zone authority in a municipal building we have already renovated to neutral symbols, just the river and a gear and a sheaf of wheat. On day 10, we publish the tariff schedules and the permit process for zone enterprises, designed to take 2 weeks from start to finish if documents are clean. The Finance Ministry will cut through our own thicket by shifting to a digital platform with status dashboards visible to applicants, so that any delay becomes visible and accountable. Around day 15, our public communications will change tone. We will stop reciting grievances and start teaching rules. Citizens will need to know where they can cross freely for commerce, how to register apprenticeships, which subsidies are being folded into wage support, which documents are needed for new identity cards that work on both sides, and how to report violations without getting entangled in detention. On day 20, we will release political prisoners whose only sin was the wrong flag in their pocket. We will not release those who shed blood. Not yet, because justice and mercy must walk in step. By day 30, we will restructure our fuel subsidy, hateful as this sentence is to say aloud, replacing it with a targeted cash transfer index to family size and delivered through the banking system. I will take the shouting and accept the dip in polls, because without this correction our currency will continue to bleed and the zone will die in a storm of black market arbitrage. On day 40, we will roll out the cross-border health referral protocol so ambulances can ferry critical cases to the nearest facility, regardless of heraldry, and we will inaugurate a joint stockpile of essential medicines. By day 50, we will break ground on 2 factories along the seam, one for agricultural equipment and one for affordable construction materials, both labor-intensive, both designed to hire veterans. At day 60, we will demobilize the first cohort of 5,000 fighters, offering stipends, training, and a points-based path into the civil service. Day 70 will see the first graduation of police who have trained in de-escalation and joint patrol techniques and who wear cameras that upload automatically to a cloud repository controlled by the Ombuds's office. By day 90, we must be able to present to the Assembly and to Parliament a ledger of outcomes, not promises. Fewer recorded incidents at the front, more pay slips in the zone, stabilization of the currency to within a tolerable band, and visible progress on corruption cases. For this pace, we will need a cabinet that governs like a team of expedition climbers tied to one rope. I will keep the table small and create auxiliary ministers assigned to portfolios that would otherwise sink us in bureaucracy. The Chancellor of the Exchequer will be a mathematician who turned to economics because numbers were being used to smother hope in our poorer provinces. Her brief is stabilization without starvation. She will align taxes to consumption where evasion is hard and reduce customs duties that feed rent seekers. The Foreign Minister will be a lawyer with a career at international tribunals, fluent in the language of guarantees and clauses, whose mission is to recruit a ring of observers rather than a ring of rivals. Defense will be given to a colonel who rose through logistics rather than special forces, someone who knows that readiness is measured in spare parts and morale, not slogans. The Interior Minister will come from the provincial councils, a man who has sat across kitchen tables and knows which rules are obeyed because they make sense and which are ignored because they humiliate. Justice will go to a judge who has rebuked me from the bench in the past and who will do so again if I try to rush the law. Energy and water will be fused into a portfolio that understands rivers and wires as the same lifeline. Health will be led by a quiet woman whose hospitals survived siege by rationing without rancor. Education will be entrusted to a union leader who taught in a one-room school and will fight me when I push curriculum faster than teacher training can absorb. Digital Commons will be a new ministry, charged with building open platforms for permits, payments, and public feedback, and with protecting data from both thieves and overeager officials. Culture and reconciliation will be the most delicate seat, led by someone who can commission memorials that do not reopen wounds and festivals that allow former foes to sing without lying. We will create auxiliary portfolios that cut across silos. Borderlands development will knit the seam into a spine of commerce with microcredit, transport grants, and market access. Veterans transition will own demobilization, not as an afterthought but as the spine of civic reintegration. Procurement integrity will be a small, feared office with authority to halt any contract if red flags flash. Climate resilience will be lean and relentless, aligning irrigation, reforestation, and flood control with everything else so our river continues to feed us rather than devour us. The cabinet will meet weekly, but the real work will happen in cross-portfolio task groups that live and die by what they deliver each month. I am ruthless only about two things: time and transparency of performance. No minister will hide behind press releases. Every minister will publish targets and be measured against them. Inside our borders, the new pact must be felt not as slogans but as shorter lines and lower prices. We begin with stabilization. Our currency must sit within a predictable band so makers can plan. We will raise the policy rate at first to puncture speculative runs, then move deliberately down as capital controls and credible fiscal consolidation take hold. The fuel subsidy becomes direct assistance to households and to transport providers who register and open their books. We will increase the floor on teacher pay and clinician pay modestly but quickly, because a nation that starves its public servants breeds extortion. We will change the VAT from a clumsy instrument that stuffs every receipt with suspicion to a digital system that reads transactions by QR code and divides remittances automatically, so that businesses escape the purgatory of quarterly visits from shifting officials. For small enterprises in the zone, we will waive corporate tax for 5 years and recoup value through payroll levies that rise with firm growth. On land, we will not reopen ancient quarrels, but we will digitize titles, map them against satellite imagery, and publish contested parcels so that the courts can schedule hearings by oldest case first, cutting backlog by a third over 18 months. Urban housing will be advanced by pre-approved plans and low-interest loans for those who build up, replacing shanties with safe density without driving the poor to the fringe. Electricity will move from ration loads to a reliability standard measured in outages per customer per year, with penalties for utilities that fail to meet the mark. We will license community solar gardens in the borderlands to give farmers and shopkeepers ownership in generation and resilience against sabotage. On justice and civic rights, we must be very clear. Amnesty will not be a blanket, it will be a quilt. Political speech, even foolish, is not a crime. Nonviolent protest is not a crime. Carrying a flag is not a crime. But murder will face trial, torture will face trial, theft from the public purse will face trial, and no one will be elevated to immunity under the banner of national reconciliation. For those who cooperate, testify, and show remorse, sentences may be reduced by community service in the towns they once menaced. The police will be retrained and rebonused around de-escalation metrics. Complaints will be logged automatically and reviewed by an ombuds office that publishes anonymized patterns. Judges will be protected, because only a fool asks a magistrate to stand tall without a guard at the gate. Media law will be revised to lift the threat of ruinous fines for errors that do not rise to defamation, while preserving criminal penalties for incitement to violence. Minority language rights will be affirmed in schools and courts in the zones where those tongues are spoken, and we will finance teacher training and translation services to make rights real rather than rhetorical. Our foreign posture will feel strange at first because it is not the romance of alignment, it is the discipline of distance. We will not flip allegiances, we will step back. The doctrine is constructive non-alignment. We trade with all who trade fairly, and we sign memoranda with those who will build without binding us. We welcome observers at every checkpoint and verification site, and we publish their biannual reports in full regardless of whether they flatter us. We seek entry into regional trade blocs as a gateway for the zone, and we accept harmonization of some technical standards in exchange for market access. We will cultivate a diaspora policy that invites capital and skills back not for charity but for profit, with diaspora bonds that pay in hard currency and offer tax offsets to those who invest in returning firms. Intelligence relationships will continue, but our services will be instructed to gather inward on trafficking, corruption, and domestic insurgent finance, rather than to dream of missions across the border that now undermine the compact. Our embassies will learn to sell the zone as a story of renewals, factories that hire instead of armories that stockpile. To our counterparts' allies, we will say that prosperity is more contagious than war, and ask them to treat us not as a proxy conflict but as a proving ground for pragmatic peace. To those who wish us ill, we will speak softly, show our verifiers, and maintain enough bite in our doctrine to make meddling expensive. On doctrine, then, to make plain what I mean by bite. Our military will turn from offense to resilience. The frontier will be held by surveillance and ready reinforcement rather than by forward mass. The backbone will be mobile brigades composed of infantry, engineers, and electronic warfare teams trained together and rotated to avoid unit fatigue. Their metric is minutes from call to wheels rolling and hours to sector arrival, not parades. We will maintain a small air wing, sufficient for reconnaissance, medevac, and deterrence, and we will invest more heavily in drones and counter-drone platforms because that is where our adversaries and our counterparts alike are heading. We will assign one brigade to riverine security, trained in boat operations, flood rescue, and infrastructure protection. Our logistics will be audited and stress-tested quarterly, and our spare parts supply will be contracted with redundancy. We will return conscription to history and professionalize a volunteer reserve trained in short cycles with generous childcare and job protection so that call-ups do not ruin families. Rules of engagement will place civilian protection at the center, and violations will be see-through to the public because secrets about war now leak faster than truth can catch them. We keep a credible deterrent by showing discipline. An army that shoots less but shoots wisely is not weak, it is trusted. No plan survives first contact with the day after tomorrow, so I want our risk register written in the open so that when one of these storms arrives, we are not caught pretending we never imagined rain. The first risk is the leak that makes the secret marriage a headline overnight. The mitigations are already layered. The legal annex exists, the recusal protocols are active, and every procurement touching the zone is reviewed by the Integrity Office that reports to me and to Parliament. If the secret breaks early, we will not deny and we will not romanticize. We will say that we bound ourselves to the discipline of peace when passion for war was still the currency of politics, and that no personal advantage has been taken. We will stand together at the river's bend and answer questions until reporters have none left to ask. The second risk is a spike in inflation and unemployment if traders withdraw while they wait to see whether the compact holds. Our mitigations are a stabilization fund underwritten by the two guarantors and a credit line from a development bank contingent on our metrics. We will front-load cash assistance to the poorest, maintain the policy rate discipline until currency expectations anchor, and accelerate public works in the seam to soak up idle hands. The third risk is violence by spoilers, decapitation attacks, seek to make us break our word. The mitigation is a joint investigative task force with counterparts, centralized intelligence fusion with court warrants for surveillance, and community rewards for tips that lead to seizure of illegal arms. Police visibility will increase where necessary, but without returning to humiliating checkpoints that break trust. The fourth risk is a nationalist backlash within the officer corps, a whispering campaign that labels our doctrine capitulation. The mitigation is education inside the military about the strategy, promotions tied to performance in the new metrics of readiness and restraint, and the presence of observers at unit exercises to signal that the eyes of the people are on their servants. The fifth risk is drought because the river does not read our treaties. Water sharing and irrigation will be governed by joint sensors, transparent telemetry, and a pre-agreed allocation formula that flexes with river flow, enforced by sanctions in water-hungry sectors rather than by abstractions about sovereignty. The sixth risk is cyber attack against our permitting platform or banking rails. We will adopt zero-trust architecture, segment critical systems, and drill recovery. Our funny money fraud team will be staffed not by career bureaucrats who fear code but by young engineers and seasoned auditors who can smell a laundering operation at 200 paces. The seventh risk is corruption dressed in the clothes of reconciliation. The mitigation is a public registry of beneficial ownership for firms operating in the zone, with whistleblower protections and bounties. The eighth risk is fatigue. Peace requires stamina. When novelty wears off and old injuries throb in winter, we will need rituals of progress, public charts that show how far we have come, and festivals that make the seam a destination, not a scar. We will measure ourselves to avoid the intoxication of our own rhetoric. The key indicators are simple to name and hard to move. Violations of the ceasefire will be tracked per week and per sector, with a target to reduce incidents by half within 6 months and to sustain that reduction for a year. Employment in the zone will rise from 0 to 50,000 in 6 months, 100,000 in a year, with gender parity across the factories that do not require heavy lifting. Cross-border trade volume, measured in tons and in value, will tick upward each quarter, with an initial focus on staples and inputs rather than luxuries. Customs clearance times should fall below 2 hours for pre-registered cargo within 3 months. Inflation must slide into single digits within a year, and the currency should hold within a 10% band month to month after the first quarter. Electricity reliability must improve to an average of 8 outages per customer per year by the end of the first year, from a baseline that is embarrassing to repeat. The demobilization program must report numbers every month, not only enrollments but job placements and relapse into crime. Police community surveys will be repeated quarterly and published regardless of whether they smile or frown. Schools must report attendance in the seam and in our own interior belt, because the first sign that families believe in tomorrow is that they send their children back to class. Health clinics will report maternal mortality and vaccination rates without lag. The beneficial ownership registry must see filings from all zone firms within 60 days of licensing and must log inspections that compare paper to reality. Each of these numbers will be visible on a public dashboard. Ministers will be rated on green, amber, red, and I will be rated as well. Soft targets, like public trust, will be estimated by polling done by independent firms commissioned for a year, so they cannot be punished for telling uncomfortable truths. Here is the roadmap that turns this from promise into sequence. In the first month, we hold the line and show our work. Ceasefire orders radiate out. The zone authority opens its doors. Permitting begins. The stabilization fund is signed and the first tranche released. The communications campaign rolls out with clear signage at crossing points, community meetings in border towns, and a hotline staffed by operators who can answer practical questions. The second month is the month of hiring. We will take idle men and women and place them in training cohorts for the 2 factories and for public works teams paving market access roads. We will begin cash transfers to vulnerable households through banks and mobile money, and we will launch a registry to avoid duplication and fraud. We will publish the tariff schedules and hold 2 meetings with traders and small manufacturers to tweak the rules where they are unworkable. The third month is for law and memory. We will inaugurate the new complaints mechanism for police conduct and open the first hearings for land title disputes with live audio so that citizens can listen without traveling. We will open a modest memorial in the seam to acknowledge the dead on both sides, without grandeur and without speeches, simply a place to weep and to plant a tree. We will deliver the first tranche of microloans to market cooperatives, with repayment obligations that teach finance rather than punish failure. At the end of the third month, we will stand before Parliament and the Citizens' Assembly with the pages of outcomes. Months 4 through 6 will knit institutions to each other. The Joint Operations Room will be fully staffed and will roll out weekly briefings open to accredited reporters. Crossings will be expanded, with 2 lanes dedicated to pedestrians and small traders, and 1 for cargo that requires scanners and inspectors. The first factories will start turning, and we will publish wage rates and hiring criteria to prevent rumor that jobs are being handed to relatives. The demobilization program will graduate its first cohort, and those who complete training will be given preference in zoning for new housing developments. Our Energy and Water Ministry will review hydrology and publish water allocations for irrigation that recycle with precision rather than flood fields wastefully. We will run the first cyber incident drill and publish what we learned. Diplomatically, we will invite the guarantors to tour the seam, to meet traders and farmers and teachers, and to issue a joint statement that the compact is on track. At home, we will weather a spike in complaints because expectations will be high. We will lean into this by opening a portal for grievances and showing how each is being handled, with medium and severe cases designated to a task group with deadlines. Months 7 through 9 will be about spreading the seam's logic inward. We will roll out the digital VAT, starting with the seam and then into the second ring of provinces, and we will offer incentives to firms that adopt bookkeeping templates that integrate automatically. We will start the Veterans Points program in earnest, granting job interview guarantees in civil service and setting quotas for apprenticeships in the seams factories. Education will begin the new curriculum in pilot districts, teaching both national histories side by side, not to erase bitterness but to understand how different truths came to be. Health will expand the cross-border referral protocol with payment settlements that prevent hospital administrators from dragging their feet. Our Foreign Ministry will negotiate mutual recognition for professional credentials so a nurse trained in our schools can work across the seam and vice versa. A small but symbolically powerful project will open, a library and co-working center at the bend where my vows were spoken, though that fact will remain with us a while longer. Months 10 through 12 must lock in gains. Inflation should be on a downward slope and currency volatility within the target band. If not, we tighten further, squeeze discretionary spending, and accelerate privatization of a handful of state-owned enterprises where political pain is lowest and financial gain highest. The seam's trade volume will have reached a level that justifies a third factory, perhaps in textiles, perhaps in light electronics, depending on market signals. We will revisit the fuel transfer and adjust the median household benefit to reflect food price shifts. Electricity reliability must edge toward the target, and we will move aggressively against theft, pairing enforcement with amnesty for those who regularize connections within a grace period. The Citizens' Assembly will convene again for a check-in, and its report will serve as a mirror for where our own rhetoric outruns reality. The demobilization pipeline must produce more workers than it graduates from the ranks of discontent. We will publish a calendar for the next year of cross-border festivals, sports matches, and markets scaled so that police can keep them safe without turning them into parades. The final 6 months in this 18-month frame will determine whether we transition from pilot to policy. The zone authority will be audited by an international firm and the results will be tough, which is the point. We will use that audit to adjust governance, decentralizing some permitting to municipal offices where local knowledge can speed diligence while preserving anti-corruption controls. The Veterans Program will have placed at least 20,000 into stable employment, and we will celebrate them in ceremonies where uniforms are traded for new work shirts on a stage with their families watching. Because symbols matter, our diplomacy will reach for pragmatic deals, especially on agriculture, where harmonized standards can unlock export markets. The police reform will extend into the interior provinces, and the first misconduct cases will end in dismissals that draw both praise and fury. The Justice Ministry will move major corruption trials into special dockets to avoid dragging for a decade. Our Energy and Water Minister will announce a river management plan that anticipates the next drought with pump scheduling, reservoir coordination, and a commitment to environmental flows that protect fisheries. Currency and inflation targets will be reviewed and, if progress holds, the policy rate will be eased in cautious steps to spur lending. We will consider public disclosure of the marriage in this window if 3 conditions are met. The SEAM employs more than 100,000 with an upward trend. Inflation holds in single digits for 2 consecutive quarters, and Citizens' Assembly confidence in the compact exceeds 60%. If we disclose, we will do so humbly and with the annex in hand to show the governance protections that kept private decisions from warping public goods. Because no map is complete without its edges, let me speak in scenarios. In the first, the sunlit path, secrecy holds as discipline rather than deceit while the SEAM feeds families. Inflation falls as planned. Hardliners grumble but lack oxygen because district budgets swell, and soldiers who once expected to die at the front build houses instead. The factories deliver orders on time. Traders learn the new rules and find them tolerable. Violations of the ceasefire drop into the noise. We ease the policy rate in the second year, lending returns, and small firms multiply in the SEAM. At this point, we might reveal what undergirded the compact, not to boast but to inoculate against later distortion. The Union is framed as a bet made when chaos was popular, governed by recusal and audit. The guarantors speak, the annex is released, and the row burns for a week before dying down, because the SEAM's payroll and the soup on stoves make outrage sound theatrical. Foreign capital dips a toe. Our diaspora returns with equipment and know-how. We enter a regional trade pact and adopt cumbersome but profitable standards. River floods one spring, we respond with rehearsed grace, and the SEAM recovers faster than the hinterlands. This is the world in which we are re-elected, and the compact becomes as boring as roads and taxes, which is to say solid. In the second, the middle road, the marriage leaks early and the revelation swells into a chorus of betrayal. Hardliners on both sides claim we sold flags for rings. Parliament is shaken, and ministers with thin backbones wobble. The SEAM is not yet paying out and the currency is still edgy. We do not blink. We stand in the open with the annex and the recusal protocols. We publish every meeting we have had with counterpart ministries since the compact, and we invite our fiercest critics into the observatory galleries to watch how arbitration panels actually function. The citizens' assembly grinds through the facts and pronounces the compact lawful and useful, but not beloved. The opposition mounts a vote of no confidence. We rally our coalition by offering oversight seats and by promising an election at the end of the 18-month horizon. The people may not love us, but numbness is not fury. Traders continue to move goods because money is a better argument than flags. Inflation tapers slowly, not as planned, but enough to see the horizon. Violations spike then retreat as joint patrols and transparent feeds deny both sides the excuse that the other hides facts. We emerge dented, not broken. The union becomes politics for a time, even vulgarized, and then recedes into the reality that most people want their own lives to improve more than they want their leaders' marriages to fail. The third path is darker. The leak arrives early and is wrapped in scandal by fabrication. Whispers of bribes, fabricated images, accusations that portions of the state were traded for personal protection. Our integrity office finds nothing of substance, but every denial fuels the blaze. Spoilers strike a checkpoint, soldiers die, and a funeral turns into a rally. Violations of the ceasefire multiply, each side producing its own grainy proof and talking heads twisting facts into knives. The seams permits sit idle, lenders delay. The stabilization fund's second tranche is withheld by a guarantor frightened of being drawn into scandal. Inflation buckles upward and food prices rise as traders hide grain in expectation of further unrest. We must decide whether to suspend the seam, punish the spoilers with visible force, and risk collapsing the compact, or to absorb the blows and appear weak. We choose a third way. We surge police with body cameras and independent observers into hotspots. We make arrests for property destruction swiftly and calmly, and we work with our counterpart to apprehend those responsible for the checkpoint attack with warrants executed by officers from both flags. Even then, the air lies with smoke. The parliament moves to censure. The citizens' assembly splits. Here we play our last card. We call an early election, not out of despair but to allow our people to decide whether this marriage and its compact are foul or fair. We run on the ledger of measurable outcomes to date, admitting what failed. If we lose, the seam may yet survive as an institutional creature larger than its parents' vows. If we win, we continue with humble tempo and stricter oversight, because the public does not return power to those who claim omniscience. There is a fourth path that lives in the background of every day, a path where the river itself becomes the antagonist. Drought grips the valley, fields crack, fisheries collapse. The seam, which asked to be an artery of trade, becomes an artery of thirst. Water allocation mechanisms are tested and found political. We do not allow this drought to become war by other means. We bind our allocations to telemetry and publish them hourly. We use price rather than patrols as the rationing tool for water-intensive industries. We finance water trucking to villages and pay farmers to fallow fields with cash that matches what they would have earned. Not because we are generous, but because crop failures become camp failures and camps become political failures. The seam's factories pivot to goods in demand during drought, pumps and filters and tanks. International support is sought and accepted, with our dignity intact, because the river is a global resource disguised as a local creek. We do not waste this crisis. We repair canals. We line reservoirs. When the rains return, our ability to share a river will legitimize our ability to share a future. In every scenario, whether sunlit or smoked, I ask you to govern as if your reputations are made of glass and your schedules are carved in stone. I will make enemies by admitting that secrecy has a role in statecraft when used to bind leaders to peace instead of to war. I will lose old friends by changing the subsidy that fed their vehicles but starved their children's schools. I will be called naive by generals who cannot imagine a doctrine where not shooting is sometimes the bravest choice. I will be called cold by activists who want justice as a sunbeam rather than as a calibrated instrument. I can live with all of that if by the end of this 18-month arc the following is true. The seam is a place where it is easier to start a business than to buy a black market rifle. The cost of bread is boring news. A farmer with a sick child does not care which side of the river the nearest clinic stands on, and neither does the ambulance. A veteran no longer stares at empty walls waiting for a call that will never come, because he is washing his hands before entering a factory he owns shares in. A teacher has stopped asking her class to memorize our grievances and has started asking them to solve the water equation that fills the basin below our valley. And the marriage that once seemed like a betrayal of transparency reads, in retrospect, as a pledge made in the only currency that could not be printed. Into meaning the risk of a shared life. We will open our books each month to show where we are on the indicators that matter, and we will hold ourselves to the unromantic. Fewer ceasefire violations, more pay slips, shorter lines, steadier prices, more children in school, better lights that do not flicker when the wind shifts. We will lift our eyes long enough to negotiate fair deals with neighbors and partners, but we will keep our feet planted in the vendor stalls and irrigation ditches where politics either feeds or starves. I have placed my own fate in a bond that cannot be unwound with a press conference. I understood the scorn when I chose it. I choose it again now here before you, not because it is clever, but because it is binding in the way paper is not. Walk with me through the first days, then the months, then the next harvest, and if we have kept our word, the river itself will become our witness. There are mechanics inside the architecture that I want you to hold as carefully as a mason holds a plumb line. The joint economic zone cannot be a place where compliance means knowing a cousin in the permit office. It must be a place where the rules are so clear that even the cousin prefers the rules. Licensing will ride on 3 rails: environmental compliance, labor standards, and origin of inputs. Each applicant uploads a standardized dossier. The Digital Commons Ministry builds the portal to read those fields and cross-check them with tax records, land registries, and the beneficial ownership database without a human gatekeeper opening envelopes with a letter opener as if the year were frozen in amber. If the data reconcile cleanly, a license is issued within 10 working days. If something misaligns, the system flags the discrepancy and assigns a case officer at random from a pool that rotates every quarter to prevent little fiefdoms from sprouting. Appeals go to a review board with 2 citizens chosen by lot and 1 civil servant from outside the zone. All of this sounds procedural until you remember how people actually live. The hawker with a stall and 2 hired hands cannot become a paralegal overnight. So the zone authority will fund a corps of navigators who sit in markets with tablets and file applications for free, paid by outcome, not by hour. We will count how many licenses they obtain and how many are denied, and if denials cluster around a particular navigator, we will ask why, not to punish the poor but to fix the process. The less paper we handle, the less temptation. The joint verification regime on demilitarization needs its own grammar. Patrols are paired, feeds shared, but to avoid the oldest trick in this book, playing to the camera, our drones will randomly switch to a shadow mode where they record but do not broadcast live, while an independent cache receives the same timestamps. When a reported violation occurs, the arbitration panel will see the same sequence that both sides saw. If the sequence reveals a staged incident, the unit commander who organized it on either side loses command and faces court-martial. If it reveals a breach caused by panic or misunderstanding, the soldiers receive retraining and the sector rotates sooner. If it reveals malice, sanctions click in automatically. A temporary snapback of customs and joint patrol privileges in that sector for a defined period. The purpose is not to orchestrate humiliation. It is to change incentives. Officers will quickly learn that their careers will be made faster in units with boring logs than in units with flamboyant skirmishes. Boredom saves lives. The Citizens' Assembly is a fragile machine that can grind if sand is thrown into it. We will insulate it with simple protections. Members receive a stipend above median wage to ensure attendance is not a luxury, childcare stipends, and secure transport. Briefing materials are translated into every language used by at least 5% of the population, with glossaries so terms like countercyclical do not erase meaning through intimidation. Experts present in pairs who disagree, and time is set aside for questions framed by the assembly itself rather than by moderators who mistake their role for authorship. At the end of each weekend, a short account of what was heard and what was argued will be posted publicly, avoiding the impression that secrecy shrouds even deliberation meant to pierce secrecy. The assembly will not be asked to produce poetic conclusions but to answer hard questions. Is the seam improving incomes? Are the rules fair? Are institutions responding when called? Does the language of the treaty match the experience of ordinary life? When their 90 days end, they will write plainly and we will respond plainly, point by point. If we ignore them, they will cease to matter. If we honor them, they will become a habit that outlives this compact. The first 100 days will go faster than planning sessions predict because the public, once primed, moves at a speed government struggles to match. The hotline will ring with questions we did not anticipate. For example, a widow in a border village will ask whether her son can apprentice across the seam while his father's body is still missing. Our rules will not yet have considered grief as an eligibility criterion, so we will write a clause that treats missing persons as deceased for administrative purposes after a sworn affidavit and neighbor confirmation sworn at the local council. A trucker will ask whether a cargo sealed in our customs yard must be unsealed on the other side. The answer will be no once scanners are aligned. To reach that, we will buy compatible machines and cross-train inspectors. A miller will ask whether the flour he blends from grain grown on both banks counts as originating in the zone. We will treat origin proportionally and issue labels that disclose percentage composition rather than forcing ingredients into the purgatory of the word mixed. These are small examples that will multiply like vines if we do not prune them. The pruning is the work. Cabinet is where pruning is either coordinated or performative. If it becomes the latter, fire me. I have asked each minister to bring 3 truths into every meeting: what they are doing, what is blocked, and what they need from another minister to unblock it. Vanity reports that summarize the past do not move the present. In week 3, for instance, the energy and water minister will say that pumps at 2 river intakes are failing because parts are stuck in customs on the other side. The foreign minister will call her counterpart and negotiate a corridor, but the better fix is for the zone authority to obtain a blanket customs pre-clearance for critical infrastructure spares with end-use verification after installation. The interior minister will admit that he cannot protect judges in one district because the police barracks there lacks power and water and morale has crumbled. The energy and water minister will send a generator and the finance minister will advance funds for rapid repairs. But the durable fix is to fold security facility maintenance into the infrastructure plan rather than treating patrol boots and courthouse roofs as separate planets. The digital commons minister will confess that a vendor tried to sell him a closed platform with glossy dashboards and lurking lock-in. He will be praised for refusing. He will build with open standards, publish APIs, and require that data generated with public money remain public property. Domestic policy will require the ugliest word in politics: sequencing. We cannot reform everything at once without reforming nothing. Currency stabilization is the first plank because without it, every other price floats on fear. The chancellor will tighten the policy rate above comfort and maintain it until monthly inflation drops below 1% for 3 consecutive months. To cushion that pain, we will accelerate cash transfers to those who do not have savings. The central bank's charter, now a stained memorandum, will become law, shielding the board from dismissal for policy decisions. Markets will still test us. The first time the currency wobbles, merchants will hoard and importers will delay. We will respond with foreign exchange auctions that are transparent and rule-bound. Priority will go to importers of staple foods, fuel, and medical supplies, with pre-qualification to prevent front companies from masquerading as hospitals. As confidence returns, we will widen auctions to cover industrial inputs. If speculation persists, we will tighten capital controls temporarily on short-term flows, explaining our criteria and sunset clauses so that investors see rules rather than caprice. None of this guarantees serenity. It creates a corridor within which panic cannot sprint. Tax administration is a place where rhetoric goes to die unless numbers bring it back. The digital VAT will begin in the seam because that is where the incentive to be visible is highest. Traders want speed. They will scan a code, issue receipts that transmit in real time, and their remittances will split automatically to national and municipal treasuries according to pre-agreed formulae. Randomized audits will test the integrity of the system and sanctions will be swift for tampering. In the interior, where connectivity is weaker, we will use offline tokens that sync when a device returns to signal. We will publish aggregate takings weekly so that citizens can see whether this reform is a feeding trough for the center or a spine that supports their councils. Over time, as receipts climb and evasion falls, the rate can fall without starving services. Our aim is to make compliance easier than avoidance and punishment certain enough to discourage the rest. I will not use the police to terrorize small traders into fear. I will use the certainty of auditing and the convenience of digital rails to make honesty the default. Land is ancestral flame. When you move it, you burn. We will not resurvey the entire nation. We will start in the seam where the compact makes legitimacy urgent. Old titles will be scanned, geo-referenced against recent imagery, and disputes logged with photographs and statements. Hearings will be scheduled by age of claim. To prevent judges from drowning, law students will clerk pro bono for credit and retired magistrates will be recalled part-time with stipends. We will record oral testimony about boundaries where written records are absent, with elders' councils recognized as evidentiary bodies where they are trusted. Where mass displacement has layered claims like floors in a collapsing house, we will pair restitution with compensation by sharing the uplift from new development value, a formula that will enrage purists but create livable neighborhoods instead of museums of grievance. Each resolved case will be published. Patterns will be studied for bias. If resolution comes slower than development, corruption will creep in the cracks. We will assign prosecutors to the seam's land courts for the duration of the backlog. Health care ties politeness to survival. The cross-border referral protocol sounds airy until you ride in an ambulance on a road with ruts deep enough to break a spine. The nearest facility is the right facility, but payment is where cooperation goes to sleep. Our system will bill the patient's home insurer at the tariff negotiated by the Joint Commission and settle through a clearinghouse once a month. Where patients are uninsured, we will create a modest risk pool financed by a levy on seam enterprises set at a fraction of payroll. This is not charity. It is a productivity strategy. Sick workers and dead mothers cost more than clinics. Stockpiles of essential medicines will be maintained at 3 months buffer and replenished on a rolling schedule. Procurement will be centralized to prevent each hospital from becoming a trader of antibiotics. See, Ontrax will require serialization of stock to trace leakage. We will monitor ambient measures, wait times, drug stockouts, and the ratio of nurses to patients in critical hours. We will listen to nurses when they say a protocol is killing them. I will not run a system where heroism is expected to plug design. Education will carry a contradictory mandate, to teach two histories without teaching two futures. Texts will present events from both narratives where they diverge, side by side, not to force children to choose, but to teach them that complexity is not betrayal. Teachers will need training, and we will not dump new books in their hands and call it reform. Workshops will be scheduled over 3 terms with mentors traveling school to school, leaving behind materials that can be used without broadband. Exams will shift toward competencies that employers value in the seam: literacy, numeracy, problem-solving, basic digital skills. If the curriculum runs faster than teacher supports, it will fail by design. We will raise teacher pay enough to reverse attrition and insist on attendance through a biometric log that pays out only when present. Where unions object, we will negotiate, but we will not pay ghosts. School feeding will expand in the seam not as a welfare flourish, but as an attendance accelerator. A child who eats at school becomes a worker who shows up on time a decade later. Foreign posture will require us to practice saying no without slamming doors. A powerful country will offer a security deal with training, kit, and strings that pull our doctrine back to a fence. We will decline the parts that shift our posture and accept the parts that strengthen mobility, rescue, and cyber protection. A development bank will offer a loan for a bridge that looks elegant in renderings and collects tolls no one can afford. We will ask for a cheaper design, a public cost-benefit analysis, and a revenue model that does not treat drivers as prey. A neighbor will float a rumor that we harbor militants fleeing justice. We will invite their officers to observe our joint patrols and hand over suspects through the mechanisms we have built. International media will rotate in and out. We will not chase their praise. We will ask that their cameras point not only to ribbon cuttings but to maintenance crews who keep pumps humming and roads patched. Glamour is shallow but useful if it reflects substance rather than torches it. Military doctrine becomes real when training stops being theater. Exercises will simulate storms, cyber attacks, and coordinated sabotage, not victory parades. Riverine units will stage rescues with civilian agencies and be graded by speed and safety. not by the number of boats on the water. Mobile brigades will test communications redundancy by deliberately failing one channel at a time. The Logistics Command will audit supply depots with serial number checks and AI that flags anomalies in usage. War stocks will be rotated into training to avoid expiry. We will contract domestic small firms to produce certain spare parts to reduce dependence on suppliers who might decide that peace is a poor market. Our reserves will train in multi-day bursts twice a year with childcare on site and employer compensation. After each cycle, we will survey families, not just commanders, to gauge whether our reserve structure is sustainable. If a commander returns from training with injured troops because he equates intensity with injuries, he will be relieved. Readiness is not machismo. The risk register will be a living document that we review monthly in cabinet, not a grand appendix that gathers dust. Populist waves can be measured before they crest. We will monitor social signals. Sudden surges in coordinated messages, spikes in conspiracy content tied to seam institutions, and community rumor logs maintained by local councils. When we see a wave building, we will not answer with censorship. That fattens the wave. We will answer with counter-speech by trusted locals and with data that punctures fear. If a lie claims that seam jobs are going only to one clan, we will publish the roster by home district with privacy respected selectively but patterns visible. If a rumor says the river sensors are spying on bedroom windows, we will stage tours for school groups and elders alike to show how telemetry works. I do not ask people to stop being suspicious. I ask them to place suspicion on a diet of facts. Where bad actors cross into threats, the law will be applied with charges that name the behavior, not the belief. Cyber risks need a particular sobriety because a single breach can unravel confidence in weeks. Our zero-trust design will segment systems so that a compromise of permitting does not cascade into banking and so a breach of a regional hospital does not spread into power dispatch. We will double-key changes to critical systems, requiring human approval with multi-factor authentication. Logs will be immutable, written to separate hardware and backed up offline. A red team will be funded to attack us with permission and publication of their findings. I want to be embarrassed once by allies rather than shredded slowly by enemies. We will join information-sharing alliances and dispatch a liaison to sit in their rooms. When a breach occurs, and we will say so within hours, describe what was taken or touched, and publish the fix. Secrecy after the fact prolongs damage. Speed contains it. Corruption is a risk that pretends to be a strategy. It whispers that this is how things are done and the poor will get theirs if the rich get theirs first. We will starve that story. The beneficial ownership registry will include trusts and chains that leap across borders. It will require identity verification tied to passports and will refuse filings that use nominees known to law enforcement. Contracts above a modest threshold will be published with bidders, prices, and variations over time. Whistleblow. Wares will have anonymous channels protected by law and funded rewards that recover more than they cost. The Procurement Integrity Office will be allowed to freeze awards and refer cases to prosecutors who themselves are measured by the speed and quality of indictments. We will not pursue show trials with confetti of handcuffs. We will pursue habits that make stealing cumbersome and boring. We will measure ourselves in ways that cannot be gamed without being noticed. Goodhart's law will stalk us. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. To fight this, our indicators will be clustered so that each tells on the others. If customs clearance times fall miraculously in one port, but reported bribes in that corridor spike, the smiley face on the first graph will be erased by the frown on the second. If inflation falls but child malnutrition rises, our stabilization has harmed the vulnerable and we adjust. If demobilization numbers look excellent but recidivism into petty crime climbs, we are warehousing, not integrating. The dashboard will group indicators into families, and ministers will be judged on the integrity of families, not orphans. Independent statisticians will audit the series we publish and sign them with their reputations. When we miss targets, and we will say so, explain why, and iterate. If we hit too many targets in a row, assume we have grown timid and raised the bar. The 18-month roadmap is not a script. It is a discipline. To give it teeth, I intend to tie ministerial tenure to milestones. If by month 6 the seam is not employing at least 1/4 of the target we set, the Borderlands Development Auxiliary will change hands. If by month 9 the police reform has not delivered cameras with auto-upload capability to all SEAM precincts, the Interior Minister will lose his deputy. If by month 12 the land court backlog has not shrunk by the promised third, the Justice Minister will move the Chief Magistrate to another seat and explain why publicly. This is not cruelty, it is accountability. I will swallow the same medicine. If inflation is not in single digits by month 12 and trending lower by month 18, I will present myself to Parliament for a vote of confidence. If the SEAM has not reached 100,000 employed by the end of the horizon, I will ask the Assembly to reconvene and judge whether the compact requires revision. The scenario matrix unfolds further when you look sideways. Imagine a year in which a factory in the SEAM suffers an industrial accident that kills workers. The alliance of critics will say cheap construction, corrupt inspectors, and a rush to impress foreign investors conspired. If we answer with condolences and nothing else, we will have earned ruin. We will answer with transparent investigations led by engineers who do not owe their promotions to ministers. We will close other factories with similar designs until they pass inspection. We will compensate families from an insurance pool funded by payroll, not by pleading for charity. We will prosecute negligent managers and revoke licenses where oversight failed. We will also refuse to allow the SEAM to be defined by one tragedy. We will reopen with stricter rules, and we will publish every inspection report. This is not spin. It is the work of restoring confidence by showing our own fallibility and correction. Consider a different season where the diaspora returns with capital and demands privileges that trample those who never left. They will want tax holidays beyond our schedule, guaranteed real estate allocations in prime corridors, and seats on boards by right of distance. It is tempting to grant too much to secure their cash. We will not. We will give them diaspora bonds with competitive returns in hard currency and accelerated licensing if they join local partnerships with tested operators. We will not allow them to displace residents from markets and riverfronts. We will invite them to mentor and to invest and to profit, but we will not replace old nepotism with a new one that speaks a foreign language. If we get this wrong, resentment will turn into resistance with a handsome smile. If we get it right, capital and kinship align. There may come a day when a minister I trust deeply whispers that the secrecy of the marriage cannot hold. The whisper will carry two signals: that the rumor mill has surpassed our ability to contain it, and that a controlled disclosure now would inoculate against a weaponized revelation later. The timing will hurt. It always does. The rule I proposed remains. Not before the SEAM feeds 100,000 and inflation sits in single digits for 2 consecutive quarters, and the Assembly's confidence exceeds 60%. If those pillars are not yet erected and the leak feels inevitable, we choose between two harms. One path is to deny and be destroyed when proof appears. The other is to admit early and absorb the fire. We will choose the second. We will call the guarantors to witness the annex again and speak jointly. We will release calendars, recusal logs, procurement exclusions, and the points where we placed walls between personal life and public decisions. I will stand with my counterpart and say that we did not begin as lovers. We began as enemies who feared that our countries would drown if we did not bind ourselves tighter than paper allowed. We will take the blows. We will go back to work and ask the SEAM to defend itself with wages. I will not pretend this does not touch the texture of my own days. There are mornings when I want to call the whole thing off and return to an honest war where the metrics are headcounts and the applause is simple. But I have seen the orphanage at the Bend and listened to boys imitate the noise of artillery as if they were learning birdsong. I made a different covenant. It holds on nights when courage looks like boredom and on afternoons when courage looks like admit. A mistake in front of cameras without making the mistake of calling it a communication error. I will describe the inside of a single cabinet meeting in month 5 to make this less abstract. We meet at 8 in a room stripped of portraits that turn the walls into a lecture from the dead. The Chancellor starts with a graph of weekly inflation, a line bending down with jitter. The policy rate remains tight. The currency auction cleared at a level within the band. She warns that food prices will rise if the next convoy is delayed. The Interior Minister reports 2 violent flare UPS near a crossing, both sparked by rumor that only one clan was being hired at the new factory. The Digital Commons Minister says the hiring portal logs show evenly distributed applications, but a glitch prevented SMS confirmations from reaching a set of numbers on one network. Applicants thought they had been rejected. The Foreign Minister reports that a guarantor is nervous about a leak in their own parliament. The Energy and Water Minister says reservoir levels are 2% below seasonal norms and asks to accelerate canal lining. The Defense Minister presents a short video of a joint patrol responding to a road accident without drawing weapons, narrated by the officers involved, not a producer. I speak last. I say fix the SMS issue by noon and publish an apology before dinner with a timeline that shows how we discovered the fault. I instruct the SEAM Authority to release anonymized hiring data by district and clan markers where volunteered to puncture the lie. I ask the Foreign Minister to fly that afternoon to the guarantor's capital with the annex and 2 lawyers. I approve accelerated canal lining and instruct the Finance Minister to release funds with a clause that requires local labor. I thank the Defense Minister for showing restraint as readiness. Then I ask each minister one question: what will you publish this week that you would prefer to hide? We go around the table. It is uncomfortable. It works. Public finance is the river in the walls. If it leaks, the house rots. We will publish a citizen's budget at the start of each fiscal year with 5 charts and no jargon. We will show where the money comes from and where it goes. We will break down SEAM inflows and outflows separately. Mid-year, we will publish execution rates by ministry, how much was budgeted and how much was spent, with an explanation for deviations. Unspent money is not a virtue if it reflects paralysis. Overspending is not a sin if it reflects emergency response. We will cap discretionary spending by ministers and require that any reallocation above a modest threshold be reported to Parliament's Public Accounts Committee within a week. I will not allow end-of-year sprees where ministries blow through balances to avoid reductions next year. We will allow carryovers for projects with credible pipelines. If the bond market does not trust us, everything costs more. If it does trust us, our future costs less. A technocratic sentence, yes, but one that a school roof understands. I have avoided the question of labor until now because it will test whether our SEAM is a partnership or a plantation. Factories will not be free to crush unions in the name of speed. We will encourage works councils elected by employees with rights to consult on schedules, safety, and layoffs. We will not allow strikes to be suppressed by police as a matter of habit. We will allow courts to weigh legality and proportionality. I will urge unions to bargain for productivity shares, not for wage floors that become impossible for small firms, and I will ask employers to publish injury rates and safety investments as a sign that they understand labor is an asset, not a line item. Apprenticeships will be paid. Unpaid experience is theft by another name. Women will not be asked to choose between work and family. Shifts will be designed around school hours and childcare support. If we get this wrong, the SEAM becomes an angry rumor with gates. The SEAM will breathe culture as well as commerce. The Ministry of Culture and Reconciliation will commission common spaces that hold memory without anchoring hate. Murals will be painted by artists from both sides. Festivals will blend music without pretending lyrics do not carry history. Sports leagues will be mixed and funded modestly but reliably so that matches do not depend on a wealthy donor's mood. I will ask broadcasters to carry games and to normalize the sight of opponents shaking hands without an orchestra scoring the moment. A library at the Bend will stock books in all official languages and will host debates moderated by teachers, not pundits. These things are not decoration. They are bridges a different kind. We will build data systems that people can check without logging into labyrinths. The public dashboard will be mirrored in kiosks at municipal offices and in markets, refreshed weekly. We will design it with citizens groups so that terms are plain and the categories reflect what people ask about: prices, jobs, safety, electricity, schools, clinics. We will not collapse everything into a single index because indices are weather vanes without wind. We will encourage local radios to broadcast key metrics and host call-ins where ministers take questions without planting friendly voices in the queue. The Digital Commons Ministry will staff a team that does nothing but translate policy into human speech. If we cannot explain ourselves, we are either confused or lying. There is a quiet threat that sits behind every ministry: burnout. Civil servants will be asked to work longer and harder than they did in the years when the front absorbed all urgency. If we do not guard their stamina, they will snap. We will implement rotation policies that swap seam duty with interior stations. We will fund mental health supports. Not the soft couch caricature, but real counseling and decompression time. We will allow heirs to bar overtime when fatigue threatens safety, even if a headline is postponed. We will promote by performance and by the courage to say no when a task threatens quality. We will fire gently but firmly when incompetence repeats. The public service will be treated as a profession. If we salt the earth with contempt, nothing grows. An unlovely subject is necessary: organized crime. When borders change, contraband looks for new paths. If we turn a blind eye because volume flows grease commerce, we will wake up owned by gangs. The Interior Minister will establish a joint task force with the counterparts Interior Minister targeting fuel smuggling, narcotics, and trafficking of people. Intelligence will focus on financial flows rather than chasing mules. We will recruit forensic accountants who know how to read shell companies and real estate bubbles. Prosecutors will use asset forfeiture laws that do not depend on convictions alone but require a high standard of proof, tied to protections so that we do not legalize theft by the state. Judges will be trained in financial crimes. Police will receive pay bumps tied to placement in anti-trafficking units with strict lifestyle audits. If an officer's car exceeds his salary by the square of his imagination, he will be investigated. I say this not to frighten but to make plain that peace economies attract those who thrive in shadows. The seam will alter the fabric of rural life in ways that urban planners often forget. Farmers near the zone will be tempted to sell land to developers for windfalls and to move to city edges where rents chew their gains. We will offer them a different path. We will provide long-term leases on their land to cooperatives that supply seam factories with raw material, sharing profits while retaining ownership. We will finance improvements in irrigation and soil health and pay for ecosystem services where farmers adopt practices that restore the river's edge. We will protect a green ribbon along the river from construction not because it photographs well but because rivers breathe through their banks. Where resettlement is required for flood control, compensation will be fair, relocation planned with communities, and livelihoods restored before ribbon cuttings. If we push people for water, they will push back with fire. In the darker scenario where violence creeps back like mold, the army will be asked to perform police work. This is a trap. We will resist it. Where policing is insufficient, we will reinforce police with gendarmes trained for civil order, not army units trained for annihilation. If a commander pleads to send troops to sweep a district to show strength, I will ask him to define success and then tell me what we say to the family whose child is shot by mistake. Showing strength in cities is performing fear. We will protect polling stations, courts, and clinics with visibility and restraint. In the worst case, if a militia seizes a crossing and declares a micro-republic, we will isolate it, cut its revenue with seizures of contraband, and negotiate disarmament with amnesty calibrated to crimes, reserving punishment for those who ordered murder. Peace requires the grace to welcome enemies who surrender and the steel to bury those who refuse. We will employ both judiciously. I have been asked in private what happens if my counterpart and I disagree profoundly on an interpretation of the compact. It will happen. We have built the arbitration panel to carry weight, but there is another tool: pause. Both sides may pause a measure for a defined period while we submit to mediation by a neutral party acceptable to both. During the pause, the pre-existing rules remain in force. This prevents spirals. We will not weaponize pause. We will use it rarely when stakes are high. The public will hate it while it lasts and bless it when the alternative is rupture. I will use pause once if necessary to demonstrate that stubbornness is not courage. If my counterpart abuses pause, we will call it out and invite guarantors to rule on abuse. It is an inelegant instrument. It is also a bridge. I will not pretend that my colleagues are all saints. There will be resignations. A minister will discover that the scrutiny that accompanies this project has uncovered a past favor they cannot defend. They will step down. We will not leak their letters as petty revenge. We will move on. Another will fail quietly for months, confusing effort with impact. They will be replaced. A third will succeed but grow insufferable and claim every victory with both hands, starving their deputies of air. I will have a conversation and, if the behavior persists, a parting. Leadership is not a scholarship for personality. It is a service contract with metrics. I include myself in this. On month 14, we will test the seam's resilience deliberately. We will run a no-notice drill where crossings close for 3 hours. We will observe queue formation, communication, and the time it takes commerce to reroute. We will do the same with a simulated cyber incident that disables a permitting submodule. We will measure the minutes until manual protocols click in and the hours until restoration. We will publish our own grades. This will be called reckless by those who profited when chaos was permanent. It will teach our teams to breathe when the lights flicker. By month 15, I want to see the seam's effects in places that do not know the names of our ministers. A farmer on the interior plateau should be able to fetch a spare part without bribing 3 men to stamp paper. A school in a coastal town should plug in a computer and find the curriculum portal loads. A woman in a highland village should be able to walk to a clinic the night her labor begins and find a midwife trained to catch breech with a gloved hand. These do not sound like international relations. They are the only relations that matter. I have been asked whether the compact relies too much on quantification and not enough on meaning. It is a fair caution. I love a good chart too much, but the chart is a map of a meal, not the meal. So we will pair our dashboards with qualitative signals. Community councils will submit quarterly narratives of change, describing behaviors that no metric catches. The way a market quiets when a rumor dies quickly, the way a teacher no longer scans the doorway for a soldier before teaching the lesson she believes in, the way a mechanic refuses cash without receipt not because he fears prison but because his peers now consider cash without receipt an insult to their craft. We will read these aloud in cabinet. They will remind us why the numbers matter and when they mislead. At month 18, where I promise to stand and account, I will not recount everything. I will say this. Either the seam will hum with the boring music of payrolls and the quiet decency of neighbors who plan together, or it will wheeze with resentment and the black market will sing a louder song. If the first, we continue with humility, possibly unveil the private bond that held us to this path, and let the public decide whether vows made in stone rooms can serve people in kitchens. If the second, we modify or we end honorably, preserving what worked and discarding what did not, and we seek a different path that does not ask for sacrifices we cannot justify. You may find it strange that a simulation of governance hinges so often on small design choices instead of grand speeches. I do not. Wars are won by supply lines and weather. Peace is built by forms that are short, streets that drain, contracts that do not surprise, and an honest announcement when the pump fails. The clandestine marriage at the heart of this work will be judged finally not by its secrecy but by whether the work it protected delivered safety and bread. I am prepared to be despised for a time if the seam earns love in the end. I am prepared to resign if it does not. I am prepared to ask our children to forgive our generation for the hollowness of our pride and to thank us for the solidity of our repairs. If there is one last image I want you to hold, it is the bend in the river where vows were made, long before the library's foundation was poured. There is a boulder in the shallows where in spring the water splits around a stubborn shape and then rejoins downstream. We are that boulder. We hold so that currents divide without destroying the banks. Downstream, the river is one again, slower, deeper, useful to everyone who draws a bucket. This is not poetry. It is hydraulics. It is how we live together without requiring each other to forget.